this is Photography Gamer. Welcome back to the channel. In today's episode of the VP Guide, I'll be looking at the photo mode in God of War Ragnarok on the PlayStation. I'll go through the settings, the functions, and aim to give you some tips to aid you in using the photo mode. And later in the episode, I'm going to focus on vignetting images, how to do it, things to give you some advice and, help you along the way. Okay, let's have a look at the basic settings. Well, firstly, if you've never used a photo mode, to take the photo, you need to use the share button on your PlayStation controller. But to enter the actual photo mode, how do you do that? Well, you pause the game and then you press the square button. Now we're in the photo mode. What can we do? Well, the L and R sticks, the analog sticks, they move your camera once you're in the mode, so you can move it around to compose the photograph. The L2 and R2 buttons, they crane the camera. Craning is essentially lifting the camera up or lowering it down. This can change your perspective. If you go low to high, like when you're taking pictures of characters, it can make them appear more like large or epic. The triangle button, that resets your settings that you've changed. If you click in the L3 analog stick, that will reset where the actual camera position is to the original point. The square button hides the user interface. This is good if you just want to see it without all of the stuff on the screen, or if you're ready to take a screenshot. And the circle button exits the photo mode when you're done. Okay, so the basic settings are done. So the advanced stuff, there's tabs on the top left of the screen. Now to go through these tabs, you use L1 and R1 to kind of go through them one by one. So we're going to go through each tab in detail. The first tab is photo mode camera, and we've got field of view first. Field of view is kind of what you'd imagine, it's what you can see. So it kind of acts like a zoom in some regard without, instead of using the analog sticks, you can use the field of view. It will go in tight, it will go out wide, but there will be some distortion on the image if you go out too wide perhaps. And underneath is focal length, which is measured in millimeters. This is more of a photographer's related setting. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but field of view and focal length, if you change one, look at the other one and what happens. It changes it. So they're both kind of essentially doing the same thing, and you can just kind of manage them depending on what you actually want from your photograph. Next is camera roll. So camera roll, essentially it's tilting. So it's taking your image, tilting it one way, tilting it the other. So you can do this if you want to do a portrait orientation. You can do this if you want to create sort of diagonal type of images. That's good for action, movement, dynamism, maybe a bit of surrealism as well. Okay, the next tab is shutter. So we've got depth of field. You can have it off or in a custom setting. Now, depth of field, it relates to focus. So focus is what's crisp. So if it's is it crisp or is it blurry? This is where we're dealing with this sort of setting. So the focus distance is underneath it. The focus distance is where is the focus originating? Like at what distance from the camera does the focus start? So that's important. So if you're photographing a character, get the focus distance bang on the character, okay? Below that is f-stops. You've got f1.4 to f32. Basically, it's a photography term. What it means is if you've got f1.4, there's a very, very shallow area that's going to be in focus. So if you're photographing, say, Kratos on 1.4, you'll barely be able to see his whole body in focus. Like his ears might be blurry. You might be able to see his face, but the back of his head might be blurry because it's such a shallow amount of focus. If you go all the way to f32, everything you can see from the right out in front of the camera to the horizon will be focused, and in between is all variable. So it's about choosing the distance of the focus and then how much do you want, and that's where f-stops come in. Next tab is brightness. So we've got a few options here. Film grain. This is good if you just want to add some texture or some grittiness to the image. Admittedly, it's not a great feature. There isn't a lot of film grain that really is noticeable, but it's there if you want to use it. Then we have exposure. That just adds some brightness to the kind of lighter areas of the image. It's good if you just want to kind of bump it up a bit, because sometimes if you're using things like vignettes, it can mute definition. So exposure can compensate for a heavy vignette a little bit. Then we have filter, so there's a variety of different filters, much like the things you would have on Instagram. So you choose a filter you like that accompanies your image. Then you have filter intensity. This is like a percentage slider. Do you want the whole filter, or do you want like a 50%, 20%, 70%? You make the judgment based on your own eye. Then we have vibrance and saturation. This again is in relation to the filter. I'm pretty sure it's just related to the filter. I don't think the saturation and vibrance, but I might be wrong. But anyway, vibrance and saturation. Saturation deals with color on the whole palette. Vibrance has less of an impact. It kind of focuses on certain parts. So they're things you should just play around with and see what the impact is. Like, do you like how it looks? Try that out. The next tab is vignette. So we can have a vignette on or off. What is a vignette? Well, I'll go into it later in the episode. The short version is it's a shadowy border around the image with the intent to make you look into the center of the photograph. So you've got the intensity and the fall off of the vignette. These are things that, it's either very heavy shadows or very light. Do you want it very obvious or do you want it very delicate? Intensity and fall off allow you to adjust those things. Then we have border. Borders are things around the image that you can use, like cinematic type borders or other things. There's a few options here. Good if you want to create some kind of mock-up poster of the game or something like that. And then we have logo. You can pick the God of War Ragnarok logo in several positions, but you can't do a lot more than that. Okay, the final tab is character. So here we've got Kratos. You can have Kratos on or off. Do you want him in the image, or do you want to take a landscape or whatever? You can do this for Atreus as well. Do you want Atreus in the picture or not? On or off? And the same applies for other characters as well. You might want to get these out of the photo because they might not fit in visually with what you're doing. They might be in the way, for example. Then we've got face. So you will have other options on here later on, but first you just have Kratos and Atreus. So Kratos' face, you can change the facial animation, and this is one of the best features of this photo mode because the facial expressions are so good and they're so expressive and they're just quality. So as you can see, there's some really nice funny options here. Great if you're doing YouTube and you want to do like thumbnails and stuff. Fantastic. And then you've got the same sort of stuff for Atreus. Again, you can play around with it and have both of the characters in the shot, have them with different facial expressions and make something really ridiculous. So really good options there. Okay, verdict on the photo mode. Well, the things you can do in this mode, they're smooth and they're well implemented, from focus management to the filter adjustment, etc. But I would say, considering it's a big flagship AAA title from Sony, there's a lot of things that are missing here that big photo mode games should have. Like, there's no contrast slider, there's no stickers to add fun elements, there's restrictive logos, there's no pose alteration, there's like minimal color toning options, there's no look at the camera options, there's very limited filters. And also you've got no grids if you want to measure distances. That's like a very basic thing. So there's a lot that they haven't put in there, which is a bit odd. Like, if they had all those things in it would be like the perfect mode, but they've just, it's kind of bare bones, but what they've put in, they've done well. It's not up to the sort of Horizon Forbidden West standards, but you can still take very good photos. In terms of scoring, I'd give it, I'd probably give it like a 7.5 out of 10 for the photo mode. It does what it does well, but it's so there's so many things missing that it really is kind of restrictive if you're a kind of photo mode enthusiast and you've played other games. There's a lot of things that this game just doesn't put in there. So yeah, it's good, but it's not amazing. Okay, so we're going to do a special topic in this episode. So today we are looking at vignetting or vignettes. So I'm just going to talk you through the whole vignette sort of sideshow of photography. So as I said before, a vignette, you put a vignette on and it puts this border around the edge of the image and it's kind of dark, and it progressively gets lighter as you move into the central point of the photo. The purpose of a vignette, it's trying to make you kind of look into the middle, so it's very good if you want to emphasize the central point of the shot, like if you're dealing with a symmetrical framing like a tunnel or archways, stuff like that, or you've got something in the middle, a portrait, things like that where you want to emphasize centrally. Now they're very common in photography these days. They're very, very common in TV and film. Like there is a kind of, I think they're very overused in film, for example, because if you watch a film these days, a lot of films have these vignettes and they're on every single frame, and it's just not necessary. Like for example, if you've got a very bright daylight shot, having a vignette around the edge is very, very noticeable. And the whole point of a vignette is that you don't notice it. It's subtle. Without thinking, oh, there's a vignette, oh, I'll look in the middle. That's not how vignettes work. A vignette is meant to be a very sort of delicate, pushing you in the direction of the center without kind of forcing you there. You know, it's just giving your eyes a little bit of encouragement. But if it's very noticeable, then it's probably doing the opposite of what it should do. So when should you use them? Like generally, like I would say, if I'm photographing my character and my character is to the left or the right of the framing, I wouldn't use a heavy vignette because it will kind of overlap the character. So yeah, I generally only use the vignettes if I'm photographing something centrally, or as I said, symmetrical framing of an environment that's got a kind of a leading pathway into the middle. Now that doesn't mean you can't use vignettes if you're side focusing a character, but you just have to use it a little bit more delicately. Now vignettes, I would say they're probably at their best when you're using a very dark environment. So you've got the brightness of a character's face, and then you've got this surrounding area that's a bit dark, but there's stuff around it that's a little bit, you don't need to see it. So you can use the vignette in that instance to really darken out the borders, and it really tunnels you into the center. So like dark images, vignettes work very well. Like this one, it's a black and white shot and it's a centrally focused subject, and the more of the vignettes I put on there, the more emphasis you have onto the center. And that's where we want you. We want you to go bang into the middle. Like this shot, for example, with Kratos on the right, you don't necessarily want the same sort of vignette because it's bright and it looks a bit weird, right? Where else can you use it? Well, silhouetting is also interesting. But no, black and white, I would say, is a good option if you want to use vignettes, because a vignette darkens stuff, and black and white photography, you can really go very extreme with contrasts. So I think, using a vignette usually helps emphasize the centrally lighter area, which is the character's face usually. But there's lots that you don't necessarily have to use in a dark environment. Like here, this is very bright, but here the border almost looks like a frame. Like a vignette can actually replicate what a frame does sometimes, like here. But you can use it without the vignette, you can use it with the vignette, you can have a half vignette. There's lots of options, there's lots of variety. You can use it with 2 characters instead of 1, but you've got to be a bit more careful because you don't want to lose characters in the vignette. So vignettes, really, what are they for? They're just like a minor sort of tweaking to help you find the key part of the image. Give your viewer a little bit of a gentle nudge where you want them to look. But you've also got to be very delicate with it to get the best out of it. So try it out, see what you can achieve. Okay, there you have it. That's a guide to God of War Ragnarok photo mode and a bit of advice on vignetting. I hope you found this video helpful. Drop any questions you've got in the comments. I will do my best to answer them. But for now, this is Photography Gamer signing off. Thank you.